Currently serving just for a few more weeks as the interim chair, and one of the exciting things I've been able to do over the last 2 years is hire some great faculty, including Stipitza Mudrajiha, who's going to be speaking to you today. And he came to our department in January of this year and comes from the Urban Institute, where he was a senior research associate in the Income and Benefits Policy Center, and also held an adjunct faculty position at Georgetown University, where he mentored some graduate students there. He got his PhD in public policy from UT Austin and was also part of their Population Research Center, and a master's in public policy from Georgetown. And his research covers a wide variety of topics related to the socioeconomic implications of aging, physical and cognitive health of older adults, their intergenerational supports, inequalities in these areas, and health and social policy in the United States and internationally. And the overarching theme that connects his research is really a focus on understanding that link between public policies and individual and population health and well-being across the life course. He already has a very strong record of independent research and productivity and research publications, although he is just starting as an assistant professor, and we're really excited to have him in our department and looking forward to having him teaching and mentoring students as well. So welcome, Stipitza.
Oh, thank you, India, for that nice introduction. Now that puts a pressure on me to deliver a good presentation that lives up to that introduction, which since this is work in progress, we'll see how successful that is going to be. I could have changed this to UW branded slides, but since most of the team actually that is working on this project is still at the Urban Institute, and that's where we started the project. I just went with what was easier for me and just kept the slides as they were initially designed, and then just built on those initial designs. So with that said, I also want to recognize my co-authors on this project. So the other PI at the project, Liz Peters, and then our senior researcher, Fernando Hernandez. We have a number of RAs who are also helping us on the project, and so their contributions are really invaluable. So the topic of this is part of my ongoing interest in caregiving, and the way it all started, just to give you a little bit of a background, years ago, maybe now 4 or 5 years ago, there was an article in the New York Times about how difference in distances between parents and adult children across the United States, and it's not uniformly distributed by any means. And so the question then started coming to our mind, because we were looking at family caregiving. Why would that be the case? Very easily one can discount as explanation that people have that it's due to differences in health regionally, because differences in distance were not really corresponding to differences in health. So, for example, you would assume that in areas of the country where parents are in worse health, so think of the South more generally, that you would see maybe parents and children living closer, because children would be providing help to parents. And in areas where parents were in better health, maybe they would be living at larger distances. But it did not really correspond to that. And so then we thought, well, we really need to be thinking even though the individual characteristics probably are the ones that are most important, the characteristics of areas might have something to do with it. You know, essentially providing those push and pull factors for people to move. Because if you think about it from practical perspective, it may come down to things such as, you know, the availability of formal care in an area, and how that interacts with you know, family provision of care. It may also come down to children's needs. It is not easy to uproot your family to move to another area if you don't have, you know, good schools, opportunities for work, and other things to organize your life in an area. And so we started then thinking, okay, so let's try to build a project around this idea where we would look more comprehensively at the set of factors that might be influencing, you know, moves of parents and children. And then, you know, that all was in the context of what was already our long-standing interest in long-term care and unpaid care. And this is something that many of you will be familiar with, and that's the fact that, you know, the US is aging, as many other countries, and you know, in fact, the number of older people with long-term health problems and related care needs is going to increase by somewhere between 2 and 3 times by 2060. And so unless we assume that there's going to be a sudden change in preference between you know, unpaid care and paid care, presumably there's going to be need for about 2 to 3 times as many unpaid caregivers as there are right now. So think about it this way, right? The old age support ratios are going down from about 4 to about 2.6 or so by 2050. So the pool of available people in the in families who might be able to provide care is, you know, decreasing. And so informal care is primarily provided by family members, as I said, and mostly by adult children. In fact, well over half of informal caregivers are adult children, and they provide more than half of all hours of care as well. Now, that is not to say that in couples where you have a healthy spouse, usually that spouse is the primary caregiver. But first, there are many cases in which there is no spouse available to provide care. And secondly, in many cases, you actually have a spouse who also needs care. So then you actually have 2 parents who need supports. Prior research suggests, as you can imagine, that the proximity of children to parents is related to the needs of both. And parents' decline in health and functioning has been previously linked to you know, moving closer, proximity enhancing moves by children and parents. And as I was just saying previously, you know, there are other factors that might be important here. You know, the place-based characteristics such as labor market conditions, availability of formal aging and care support services. So with that, we developed a project that essentially had 3 aims. And first of these aims is gonna be most of what I'm gonna be talking about today. And that's essentially to examine geographic proximity of adult children to their older parents and proximity and caregiving conditional on parental care needs as a function of parent and child, personal characteristics, economics and socio-demographic characteristics, characteristics of the dyad, parent-child dyad, and characteristics of place. In doing so, we do consider co-residence and distance separately. Now, this is one of many, and that's going to be, I guess, a continued theme throughout this talk is, discrete decisions that we need to make throughout this process, and that we are still in the process of making in some cases. So in this case, there is some literature that essentially considers co-residence a zero distance. And so you have a continuum from, living together to whatever the distance is. Basically just you turn co-residence into zero, starting point, and then you count in whatever way. Now, how you count is a whole can of worms. We had many ideas of how we should treat distance. You can think of it as, actual miles, which right now we are doing, basically taking centroids in places where people live, in counties, and then looking at the distance. But you could theoretically try to measure the time that it takes to travel between two places. Crossing 5 miles in LA during rush hour is not the same thing as crossing 5 miles in some, rural area with no traffic. It's going to take you infinitely less time. And that is important fact. So, every decision that you make is going to have very important implications, but it gets extremely hard if you want to do travel time, because then you get into the issue of what are the travel modes. And so, we can decide to take car, but, in urban areas, you're going to have public transportation. And where are we going to draw the line? What about, flight time? If for in cases where care is provided, maybe not so frequently, maybe that also is an option. So because of all these complications, even though we started building a time-traveled data set, and we may still end up using it at some point, the default was to go with the simplicity of just the actual distance in miles between the addresses, basically where people live, right? And as I said, we decided to treat co-residence and distance separately. Why? Because we do consider that there is a huge difference between having one household versus multiple households. Even if you were living in the same building, but we're in two separate households, it has different implications because of the economies of scale. And you are paying one set of utility bills. You are basically you're sharing a number of features that make co-residence distinct from living close but in separate households. And therefore, as I said, we have co-residence as one set of equations, one set of models, and then we are modeling distance separately. Okay, and then the second aim was really to model changes. So basically, to see what happens when parents' health starts declining. What is their response in terms of the moves of parents and children? Do they tend to move closer? Who moves? Who benefits from the move? And so for that second aim, I'm really just gonna, at the very end, touch upon some preliminary descriptives. That work is forthcoming. And then the third aim, which is here grayed out, is because it's grayed out because it's not part of this presentation, but it's just to give you a sense of where we are going. It essentially repeats the analysis from aim 1, but moving the envelope a little bit further than what was done in any of the literature that we know of. And that is to look at distance and provision of care as jointly determined processes. Because in most of literature, what you see is basically people are either modeling distances or provision of care. So it's a provision of care, already taking location as a given, or just modeling a location separately. Whereas we think that those two decisions are being made essentially simultaneously. They're yes. Oh yeah, no. Yeah. So we're just so even though they happen sequentially, they are part of the same decision process.
How much of that is driven by kind of data limitations versus kind of limitations in how people were thinking about these relationships conceptually?
In this case, I would say it was primarily conceptual. There are many parts of what we are doing, and I'll point out a number of instances where we are hitting, limits of what data can do. But in this particular case, it's just that usually people who look at the distance between family members and location decisions, and people who are looking at caregiving, they don't come from same disciplines. And so I think that's where the biggest disconnect was. And that was part of why I think NIH got interested in this, because of this idea of, pointing out something that seems intuitive, but for whatever reason, we were really surprised when we were looking at the literature that we couldn't find that anyone was really looking at this as a joint process. And so, and it really is not that much. Once you have all the legwork done, which is the here described under aim 1, it really is relatively simple step to just then model this as joint process. So that's really, one can almost think of this aim as an add-on to that aim 1. But essentially, aim 1, you can find it in 2 separate literatures, and then aim 3, the joint consideration of the 2, you couldn't find in any prior literature. Okay. And then we are also considering, we are separating, looking in the same models, but separating people who have, cognitive impairments versus just functional limitations. Okay, so the data, and many of you may be familiar with this, is from Health and Retirement Study. And let me know, how many of you are familiar with the HRS? Okay, so some are not, okay. So essentially, HRS is the study of adults aged over the age of 50. And that's one of the common mistakes. Many people say, oh, people age 50 and older. Not true, people over the age of 50. Some of the sister studies of the HRS, such as the Survey of Health, Aging, and Retirement in Europe, that one starts exactly at 50. So there's a little bit of difference there. It's a really nice study because it has a broad set of information on socioeconomic characteristics of people. It really has detailed information on their wealth, income, some of the life history, and you also have information on their children. And even though we are not using it, on their parents as well. So parents of the people over the age of 50, as well as children of people over the age of 50. It's nationally representative, and for those of you who may be interested in using it, RAND actually produces user-friendly version of it, which is an excellent way to dip your toes if you really want to start somewhere, because it can be a little bit overwhelming if you want to use the raw data. Now here we are using raw data because we have to for some questions, but usually the way this functions is you start with the RAND data, and then if you need, you add onto it whatever information you need to grab from the original, from the raw data, right? Okay, and so we are having as unit of analysis parent, adult, child dyads, and the sample that we have has now, the interviews are of about 20,000 people, a little bit less every wave, and then their information on their family members. So when we pool the sample for years 2004 to 2018, and for all the parent-child dyads that we had over that period, we get pretty healthy sample size of almost 280,000 dyads. And that's of parents age 65 and older, and children who are 25 and older. Why 25 and older? We wanted to capture primarily children for which we would be more or less certain that, for the most part, unless they're PhD students or something, that they finish their school, right? Because where you go to school influences the decision where you live. And so for the most part, with few exceptions of us, the crazy ones who want to stay in school until late 20s and early 30s, with those exceptions, most people would be done with education by that time. For our sample with health condition, we have all those who meet the same condition. And then the criteria is that they have to have either at least one or more limitations in the functional limitations in the activities of daily living, or severe cognitive impairment. And that gives us about 70,000, a little bit less than 70,000 dyads. And then the caregiving sample is actually slightly smaller, speaking of data limitations. Caregiving sample is slightly smaller than the sample of parents with health condition, and that's because of the way HRS collects data on caregiving. It collects data on caregiving from people who indicated that they have limitation in the activities of daily living or instrumental activities of daily living. For the most part, people who have severe cognitive impairment tend to have at least one limitation in the instrumental activities of daily living. Now, instrumental activities of daily living, we are talking about managing money, reading map, being able to prepare, meal for yourself. So these are the kinds of activities that do involve, cognitive effort. And so if you have severe cognitive impairment, the chances are you're going to be experiencing some kind of issues with instrumental activities of daily living. But it's not everyone. And so there's a subset of people who score poorly on the tests that are used to determine who is going to be designated as having severe cognitive impairment, but they still don't report, they or their proxies do not report that they have difficulties with the instrumental activities of daily living. To what extent this is misreporting, to what, we can question that. But anyway, it's a limitation in the data that exists, right? And I'll talk more about geographic data shortly, but let me tell you, it comes from a number of sources. Here I just mentioned several, but in reality we probably went through a list of 20 plus different data sets to try to come up with appropriate measures that describe the local context. So I already talked about our decision to distinguish between co-residents and not co-residing. Now, in terms of the distance and how we form that variable, it's a categorical variable for the time being that distinguishes between those who live within 10 miles, 10 to 60 miles, over 60 miles. Within 10 miles is driven by the data set. So another limitation. Why? Because HRS asks location, so the addresses and locations of children only of those who live beyond 10 miles from their parents, right? So they ask, does your child live within 10 miles? And then if the child lives within 10 miles, they don't ask you about the geographic information any further. If you live beyond 10 miles, or at least your parents estimate that you live beyond 10 miles, then they ask about the exact location. And so, ironically, in a way, you get better quality geographic data for those who live beyond 10 miles, like more precise than those who live within 10 miles. So within 10 miles, you have to essentially make an assumption that they more or less, live close enough to their parents that it would be same area. Now that's not ideal, but it is what it is. And then the 60 miles was really more of our discrete decision, and it was primarily based on the idea of what is a reasonable distance where people could still be providing care at some frequency. It doesn't have to be necessarily every day, it could be, but at least it needs to be close enough that you can think plausibly about someone getting into a car and traveling that distance multiple times a week. So at some regular schedule, right? And then, greater than 60 miles, we are assuming that it becomes logistically challenging to provide care at any with any regularity. So that's one dependent variable, and then the other one is just the provision of care, whether a child provides help to parent or not. And we may actually refine that further and look into the intensity of care, because we do have hours of care for those who are providing care. So one of the next steps could be then to go beyond this measure of whether you do or do not provide and look into the intensity of care provision. In terms of parental health, we are, as I said, using severe cognitive impairment, activities of daily living, but are also considering using instrumental activities of daily living. So right now, we are not conditioning for those people who have severe cognitive impairment that they have some limitation in the instrumental activities of daily living. That's going to be part of the sensitivity analysis, looking at what happens with the results if we also condition that people who report severe cognitive impairment also have instrumental activities of daily living. Just as a quick note there, severe cognitive impairment is not clinical diagnosis. right? Most of large surveys that we have do not have clinical information. HRS does have a subset that is called ADAMS, well, the acronym is ADAMS, and I'm blanking on actually what it stands for. But in any case, for that subset, and it's a subset of years for people over the age of 70, they actually got clinicians who made evaluation. And so that is as close as we have in large surveys to the gold standard of having clinical diagnosis. But otherwise, HRS, as other surveys, relies on algorithmic measure that is based on, some kinds of tests of, verbal fluency, memory, etc., that are administered to people. Then you establish some kind of cutoff points, and then based on those cutoff points, you're basically bucketed into, normal cognition, cognitively impaired, non-dementia, or what people colloquially sometimes say mild cognitive impairment, and then severe cognitive impairment. But that's based on cutoffs, right? That are established there. So rather than the diagnosis. Now, that's not to say that diagnosis, if you actually had, so clinical evaluation would be gold standard. Actual diagnosis, not so much, because we know that minorities and Latino population in particular is severely underdiagnosed on dementia. And so even if you have, information, and we do have information on whether you've been told by doctor that you have, Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, that's not a good information to use, because we have this, built-in bias. And so that's another thing to think about, especially if you're interested in racial and ethnic differences. Okay. In terms of that, just geographic variables, and then I'm going to switch to results. In terms of geographic variables, we are looking at the whole range of them, but it essentially, there are two groups right now, and those are the variables that we are directly using, and those are the ones that have been proven in the literature, or that we think of as those that are most directly impacting, that are most directly impactful on the decision where to locate, especially in the context of care provision. And so we, have variables such as the number of physicians, home health services, nursing and residential care facilities, continuing care, assisted living facilities in an area. And we do county level analysis, by the way, some key economic characteristics, and then there's a bunch of other things that are potentially interesting, but might not have that big of a weight individually, that we tried with, using essentially factor analysis to boil them down to one index. And that's this last item, the desirability index. And that one really, in addition to the types of variables that I mentioned previously, also looks at the, the property and violent crime, air pollution in an area, the temperature extremes. So, and I know, I mean, when you hear about temperatures, you may think, some people like colder weather, some people like warmer weather. It's very personal. But in this case, what we are really looking at is the extremes, the number of extremes days of heat or extremes days of cold in an area. Rather than what's the average temperature or something like that. Air pollution, that obviously makes sense. So this the particulate matter in the area, etc. Okay, and then the whole set of usual personal socio-demographic characteristics. And then models are, or the methods are really simple for this first aim. And they include, just the OLS and PROBIT models of co-residence and multinomial logistic model of distance. And then pretty much same thing for modeling caregiving. What we are thinking of right now in terms of that aim 3, where we're going to model jointly, the first pass will be to use the bivariate probit that will allow us to look at two binary processes simultaneously, and then for aim 2, where we look at the change, we'll be looking into random and fixed effects models, maybe with mean centering. So, okay, what do we see in terms of aim 1? Those who have health condition, where parents have health condition, there's obviously higher likelihood of living together, much higher likelihood of child being a helper. Same thing is sort of with the distance. Parent-child diets tend to live a bit closer if parents have if parents are in poor health. Now, just in terms of geographic profiles of the areas, there's nothing really earth-shattering, except if you look at co-residency, people are more likely to co-reside in areas that tend to have lower availability of nursing care facilities, continuing care, assisted living facilities. Also in areas that have higher rent, which talks a little bit about the economies of scale and people living together where rents are high. And generally, they tend to be more likely to co-reside in large metro areas. What you will also see, which is interesting, is that areas where people co-reside also have more physicians. And even when we control for other things, that is gonna remain. So now, just quickly to go through some of the key model results. As you would imagine, people, if older adults have cognitive impairment or functional limitation, they are more likely to co-reside with their children, but generally much more so with cognitive impairment than other types of functional limitations. And even in the sample where that is conditioned on having a health condition, you see that there's this gradation of having severe cognitive impairment and functional limitation being most in those cases, parents and children are most likely to co-reside, less so when there's cognitive impairment only, and even less so when there's a functional limitation only. In terms of some of the community level characteristics, we see that, as I mentioned, the larger number of availability of physicians is positively associated with living together, but then having more home health services, nursing and residential care services is generally negatively associated with living together. In terms of other characteristics, as you may imagine, they are what you would expect it. So generally, the older the children are, if they're partnered, married, if they're college educated, if they have siblings, if they have young children, if they are working. All those things are negatively associated with parents and children living together. And in terms of parents' characteristics, older the parent, if parent is female, Latino, Latina, or foreign-born, that increases the likelihood of co-residence, or is positively associated with living together. Moving ahead, when we look at the distance, we sort of see the same pattern repeating, except maybe that here you can see if people have just functional limitation without severe cognitive impairment, the results don't reach statistical significance, but they're still positive, right? In terms of living closer as opposed to living beyond 60 miles, right? Here you do see, unlike in the models of co-residence, here desirability index pops up as significant, unlike in previous models. In terms of other characteristics, again, same thing that I just said, more or less applies, just that the smaller the sample, few of the characteristics fall off the list of being significant, but in essence remains similar. Okay, and then what is really interesting is, we can just summarize these findings and say that in general, parents and children are more likely to live together or at closer distance when parents need help, and children are more likely to provide health-related help. The greater the availability of nursing home facilities and home health services, the lower the likelihood of co-residence. And then there's a number of other characteristics like living closer. There are a number of other characteristics that are associated with living closer, including the more physician availability, higher desirability index, higher unemployment, lower rent, and then several other characteristics that pop up in different specifications, but not consistently across all models. Having severe cognitive impairment is related with noticeably higher likelihood of co-residence and living in close proximity, as well as receiving care, compared to functional disability without cognitive impairment. Okay, and then, as I said, findings that are related to parents and children's health profiles and socio-demographic, economic health profiles are consistent with those from prior literature. In particular, as it relates to daughters being more likely to live close and provide care, if there are multiple siblings, then each sibling being less likely to live close or provide help, having a spouse or partner also being linked with less caregiving from children, which basically makes sense because we are talking about competing demands on time resources. So essentially, if you have family of your own, you have your own children, you have to spend time caring for them, makes it less likely that you're going to be spending time caring for parents. Okay, and so just to give you a little bit of flavor, as I said toward the end, that I would give you a little bit of flavor of what's happening with AIM2. So here we're looking at changes, right? So what happens with when we see from one wave to another onset of a health condition, and you see that generally children are more likely to move in with parents, but marginally this changes as parents experience health decline. There's a marginally increased percentage of parents who are then moving with, yes?
Is this variable on moved in, do you know that the parent has stayed in their same residence?
Yeah.
So you know that this isn't them moving into a different place together that's.
Yeah. So we can see whether a parent moves in with child moves in with parent, or both are moving in together to a different location. Okay. Yeah. So here we are seeing that parent moving with child increases as parents' health declines, and then there's a question where people who moved are asked who was helped by the move. So there's a direct question on who was helped, and there were you see here a clear pattern that if parents have a health decline, the percentage of answers that they give that either the move was to help them or the move was to help both them and children increases. And especially when the parent is moving. Pretty much when parents are movers, the child is almost never a beneficiary, sole beneficiary of that move. Okay. And then, so that was about co-residence. Now, in terms of change in distance, and this is basically just looking at T-1 and T. So basically, where you lived at T-1 and where you live at T following the decline in parents' health. So you see this yellow boxes here. When you combine them, essentially you get those that are decreasing distance. So in other words, that are living closer. And so the combined, where there is no health decline is about 9%, or what is it, 8%. And the combined here, these three boxes combined, where there is a health decline, there's about 13%, 13.5, almost 14. So it goes from about 8% to 14%, the percentage of moves closer when there is a health decline. And because of the nature of how the data is collected, this is probably an undercount. So what we're gonna also be doing is extending this to looking at T-1 and T-2 relative to T. Why? Because what interviews in HRS happen every 2 years. And so, and the decision to the actual act of moving for logistical reasons may take a while. And so if the health decline happens very close to the time of the interview, there may have not been enough time for children to move. So, you know, if somebody just experienced health decline in 1, 2, 3 months before the interview, children may not have had time to move. So we may actually expand this and look a little bit, you know, what happens with 2-period difference here. Okay, and so essentially, just to conclude, you know, we see that severe cognitive impairment has stronger impact on parent-child living arrangements and geographic proximity. Location characteristics play a complex role. There is some tentative evidence of complementarity of formal care resources and informal care with respect to the physician availability. People tend to live closer or live together in the areas where there's more physicians, but simultaneously of substitution effect when it comes to a negative relationship with living closer or together, and a nursing home availability, residential care availability, and home health care availability. Okay, and there's just some evidence of area desirability being linked with closer distance between parents and children. Okay, we just talked about AIM2 and basically, you know, children being more likely to be the ones that move in with parents, more likely to move closer to parents, but needing help increases the likelihood that parents are going to move with children or move closer to children. And so generally those who report being the ones who moved in are also the ones that report that they are the beneficiary of the move. Okay, I already talked previously about next steps. It includes lots of sensitivity analysis, joint modeling of parent-child distance, and modeling change in distance and location and provision of help as a function of change in health needs. And so with this, I want to bring this talk to an end, at least this portion of it. Any suggestions, not, what you have right now would be great, but even if you think of something, if you have nothing better to do and you want to think about parent and adult child living arrangements and geographic distance, and then you get some brilliant idea or just have a nagging question, feel free to email me, and I'll be very happy to engage in conversation on this topic. So thank you. I can do it unless there is some online questions which I.
And since you're new to the job, I don't know if you know everybody, so please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Heather Hill. I'm a faculty here at the school. I'm super interested in this idea of the variation in distance between parents and kids. And I guess I want to kind of go back to the beginning and some of the descriptive stuff and just ask you whether you looked at some things, which you may have, just didn't seem what's shown here. So my priors, knowing nothing about this, would have been that most of the variation here would be about class. And by that I mean both the sort of SES of the family that the child grew up in, but also their subsequent class status, occupation, education, some measure of that. And this is like, again, not based on any empirical knowledge. I'm just like, this would have been my priors about what this was about. And so I wondered if you, before you bring in the question of an actual health condition, whether you just looked at the variation in distance between older parents and grown children, and just tried to see what sort of demographic characteristics, and I'm particularly interested in class, are most predictive of that relationship. And is it kind of a gradient, or is the picture more complex than I would have guessed?
I would say it's more complex, but that doesn't mean that you're incorrect in a way. It is one of the important factors for sure, but it's not the only factor. There are other factors that are important. So child's gender plays a big role. There are then education plays a big role. Now we can say to what extent is education endogenous to social status, but then you can sort of play this both ways, because social status may be a function of education as much as education is a function of social status. So I don't know where we would end that discussion, but education does play an enormous role. The number of siblings, and we know that from economic literature, plays very important role as well, including the birth order. Generally, the older sibling is the first mover, and so the older sibling tends to live further because they get to decide first on, they're the first one to finish school, so they can move further. So there are a number. It is a fascinating topic. So I really like your question, because and that's something that probably we should include or explore as part of this project. So we did it, but it's not just a part of the core questions that we're exploring, but definitely there are a number of factors that are known from the literature that tend to be relevant in terms of where people live and also who provides care.
And then it might be interesting if some of those stand out as kind of potential moderators for like what happens when there's actually a health problem that might vary depending on class status. Or,
and then as also foreign-born status, right? So that matters as well. So there are a number of these characteristics that not all of them are necessarily purely socioeconomic stats. So it doesn't boil down fully on socioeconomics.
I really liked Heather's question, Sarah. And I was also thinking about conditional or thinking about ways in which different contexts might shape different patterns. And I wondered if, so besides family structure, which you mentioned, which I was thinking about, I was wondering about cohorts and whether there might be differences across cohorts. And the other question I had was economic downturns or upturns, and to what extent those might condition these patterns.
Yeah, so both are great. So essentially this comes down to cohort and period effects. Yes, so the short answer is yes. It's gonna be probably part of what we're gonna explore once we are comfortable with the models that we have. Now we know I was actually just yesterday looking at the moves and how there's a secular trend in the US of people being less likely to move. Right. So in essence, there was always this idea of the United States being this society that is always on the move, and people are just moving for jobs across the country. And increasingly, the US is becoming similar to Europe. It's like people tend to stay in the same place, which has important implications for not only for this issue but for the wider economy, because essentially. You sort of lock in the economy that you have, because it really, oscillizes the economic structure in an area. And so if you're not willing to move for jobs, it becomes much harder for the economy to achieve that optimal equilibrium, geographically speaking. And so that's one of the reasons why there's such continuous disparities across European countries. But you see those regional differences emerging here and becoming like deeply ingrained. Having said that, there is still a little bit more mobility here, and that's why you're now seeing the economy booming in some of the southwestern states that were not necessarily the engines of growth decades ago, when it was Silicon Valley and this area as well, which continue to be important, but there is a little bit of shift toward other areas, and you see much less of that in Europe. And part of the reason why that might be happening is that the labor force is not moving where the jobs are. They stay in the place. So there's absolutely that secular trend, which then makes it very important to look at cohort differences. And then we are talking about, in terms of period differences. Yes, I mean there are events like COVID that just happened, and pretty much everybody stays in place. And so COVID in particular, thankfully we are not dealing with, because we simply don't have the family geographic links that are reaching the period of COVID. But it's going to be very important to look at that question in the future. Having said that, we do have several economic downturns, including the recession in early 2000s, and then the dot-com bubble and burst, and then great recession of 2008-9. And so I think that it's a good suggestion. I mean, we do have, we are not showing, obviously, we would have like a period, just included like the year as period effects. But whether we want to have just that to mop up the variation, or if we want to more explicitly explore those period effects, that's a valid point and something that we could consider. Yeah.
Hi, Stan Eisenberg. I wanted to follow up on that.
Yeah.
I know this is straying a little bit from your original aim.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about why there is that secular trend of decreasing mobility?
It's hard to say. I mean, my guess is as good as anybody's. It can be it can be a number of factors. I mean, some may be related. So, for example, what happened now this is probably not the case, but you know, the availability of real estate and how easy it is to live independently and establish yourself to live independently. Whether that has anything to do with it or not, I don't know. But for example, during the COVID, that's been, you know, one of the things that was credited. And even now, you have the market where people don't want to sell their houses. They have locked in interest rates, low interest rates, etc. Don't want to move even if it's for a job. So there may be things like that, but I don't think that's what's really happening. It may be just, you know, and this is maybe it's a natural process that happens to any society as it matures. And because, you know, European societies are so mature and also getting older on average, people tend to be less mobile with time. And so as this society is getting more mature, where even though immigrant population is large, as a percentage of population is not necessarily growing, you know, there may be less of that mobility happening. I don't know. The short answer is I don't know. I mean, we can be throwing these wild guesses, but I really don't know why that would be the case. I'm sure that there are, you know, economists who are focused on studying, you know, the regional economics, who would probably have better ideas of what might be happening and why people are essentially being less willing to move, which, you know, from the point of what I'm doing and caregiving, actually may work beneficially, may benefit older adults in as much that may offset some of the issue of old age support ratios declining. Because a precondition to provide support is to live nearby. And so the less mobility you have, the more available children you have, even though the overall number of children is declining, but more of them are living closer. So it may, just in the context of caregiving, it may actually have positive effect, but generally speaking for the economy, it tends to be considered a negative.
I have two questions.
Yes.
Should I ask one at a time or?
Whatever you prefer.
Well, first off, I'm Jennifer. I'm a student in education. Sorry, I didn't yet. But my first question is sort of related to Heather's question about economic status, but how it might also intersect with morality. I could be wrong, but I don't think I might have missed this, but I don't think I saw.
Actually, it is there. It was sort of in the bottom of the screen. So we use the bill codes to classify areas as metro, non-metro, and rural. But we're going to be refining that measure because, you know, right now we are probably over classifying areas as metro areas relative to what is more standard in the literature and what you would find, for example, you know, in a number of Pew surveys and others where they have a little bit of a different definition. But yeah, we are taking into account, you know, rurality of an area. That's absolutely an important.
Okay, then I'll just skip straight ahead. Can you talk a bit more about how you created the parent-child dyad? Like if there are multiple children providing care, how do you see that?
Yeah. So the dyads are between each child and parent.
Oh.
So we have absolutely all kids. Now where the issues start occurring is, whether these are biological children, adopted children, children-in-law, and so we are not considering children-in-law as a general rule. Now, if we have a child's spouse, and the child passed away, and the survey continues collecting information from the child-in-law, who's the only surviving from that, then we take, because essentially in the HRS, then that child takes over the role of the child. It's a small number of cases because children are generally younger, so not that many of them pass away. But in those cases, we use children-in-law. And then the other thing, and that's something that we are just working on right now, is in terms of the provision of care, because in the care provision part of the questionnaire, you can indicate any other person, and that can be child's spouse. And so what to do in the cases where the child does not provide help, but the child's spouse is the one who provides help. And so we are now toying with, ascribing the help provided by child-in-law to that parent-child dyad, where the child, him or herself, indicates that he or she is not providing help, but you have a spouse who's providing help. Now, imagine these are, in some cases, we are talking about, people in their 80s and 90s, so children would be in their 60s. These are more, these are not Gen Zs. And so in many cases, you have more traditional gender roles. And so especially for some populations, you have this issue where it may be that the son, for example, is not providing care, but the spouse of the son is providing care to that child's mom or dad, right? And so do we just disregard it, or do we count it as help? We are leaning toward accounting for it, but then we'll just be figuring it out.
Thank you. I think we're at time, actually. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.